On the 25th of April 2015, Alex Hatoum and Eric Rasmussen were on opposite sides of the world. Alex was in meetings in northern Mexico, and Eric was co-chairing the World Congress on Disaster and Emergency Medicine in Cape Town, South Africa.
Nepal's death toll rising into the thousands as millions suffer through the country's strongest earthquake in more than 80 years. The country now on the verge of a humanitarian crisis.
That day, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit Nepal about 45 miles northwest of the capital Kathmandu. Reports within the first few hours indicated a world-class disaster, with severe infrastructure damage, thousands of casualties, and the need for a global response. Alex and Eric connected quickly and determined that this event would likely meet our criteria for deployment. From that point, we began identifying potential team members, travel logistics, and equipment preparation. Within a few days, we'd learned what we needed to know and had generated a proposal for the Roddenberry Foundation. That proposal was reviewed, revised, and accepted, and the team prepared for deployment. The airport in Kathmandu was damaged and very crowded with medical evacuation flights, so we chose to deploy with only a single complete water purification system. For that single system, we decided to take a team of 3, Eric Rasmussen, Alex Hatoum, and Eric Wendt. We also decided to align with a professional photographer, Lorenzo Moshe of Rome. Lorenzo had been with us in Super Typhoon Haiyan and does gorgeous work, so we were glad to have him. By coincidence, one of our Roddenberry disaster team members was already in Nepal. Steve Birnbaum had been in a UN meeting in Dubai when the earthquake hit and immediately flew from Dubai to the UN's Emergency Telecommunications Cluster in Kathmandu. We were in close touch many times prior to our own departure, and Steve met us in Kathmandu on our arrival. He had arranged lodging, transportation, and contacts for us in Nepal, and his presence was important to our success. Despite our decision to deploy with only a single system, the transport logistics were still a significant challenge. We decided to ship only the generator and to take everything else as checked baggage that would remain with us in the cargo hold of each aircraft we flew. Those arrangements still required support from senior management at DHL Aid and Relief Services. 48 hours before our departure, we were attending online meetings that involved people already deployed to Nepal. That gave us a chance to think about several possible sites for the system before we left the United States. Another valuable networking link was to a local Nepalese PhD anthropologist living in Kathmandu, Dr. Prem Khatri. Prem had trained at the University of California before returning to Nepal, and he worked in the Nepalese government briefly before he accepted a faculty position at Tribhuvan National University. While there, he became first the chair of the Humanities Department and then the dean of the university. Locally in Nepal, he's very well known. We'd been in touch with Prem before our departure, and he met us for breakfast early on our first morning in Kathmandu. He proved a linchpin for our future efforts and is now our Nepal country manager. After our arrival and registration in the country and with the international response community, we began attending meetings with the UN's Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene Cluster. With their help, we began to evaluate the several areas they thought might need support from us. We started our first site survey in Bhaktapur, a medieval Nepalese town southeast of Kathmandu. We surveyed the most damaged areas carefully and found that there was already strong NGO support for water, food, power, communications, and medical care, so we moved on. While we were in Bhaktapur, Prem told us that he also teaches in schools in the hill country of the Himalayas north of Kathmandu, and he was fairly certain large areas had not yet been seen by any relief organizations. We accepted his offer to show us several remote villages. We explained to the UN where we were going, and then drove up into the hills below the Himalayas on very rough dirt tracks and looked at 2 villages. Each had independent water supplies that were working fairly well, so we kept going farther into the hills. Our 4th site survey, the 3rd village, was Dharmastali. Dharmastali had clearly been severely damaged, and we soon learned there had been many deaths. The village elders brought us to their central water tap, and the water from that faucet looked and smelled contaminated. The cloth that you see here on the pipe is an attempt by the villagers at a filter. We learned from the mayor that this village of about 3,500 people was 1,200 years old and had never had good water. They were near the end of a long and very old pipeline from a mountain reservoir several miles into the hills, and there were more than 20 taps off that line before this village received anything. Diarrhea rates were high, children were stunted, and the village was too poor to make any effective changes. We were introduced to the local high school science teacher, a few of his students, the mothers group, and the local civil administrators. Each confirmed the story, asked for our help, and pledged their support. We decided to do our work there. Our careful pre-deployment plans, of course, had to change. We'd prepared for the urgent delivery of purified water from a running source like a river near a population displaced by the earthquake. We'd expected to turn over the system at the end of 10 days and to have a small business there selling clean water at the end of 3 months. Instead, we began adapting our system to the needs of a village that clearly had a short-term crisis, but which also had a longer problem of bad water that had contributed to centuries of poverty and illness. We began working with the villagers to determine what an adequate drinking water solution might look like. Over the course of an afternoon, we together sketched out a plan to use our system, plus a lot of local labor and expertise we could hire, to deliver clean drinking water to a pair of taps in the center of the village all day, every day. A long-term solution instead of a short-term fix. That early sketch was revised many times over the subsequent 48 hours, and we gained even more local village support when we hired the local plumber, the local welder, the local painter, the local electrician, and a local teacher. We expanded our plans to include, at their local request, a small iron shed to hold our system as a permanent installation for clean drinking water. The site they chose was in their central plaza next to their 300-year-old village temple and their ancient festival pole. As we began to clear the site, the village elders met to talk about us, and they brought us their requests. Based on their urging, we kept the existing water tap because it was a good pressure for washing dishes, clothes, motorcycles, and themselves. We buried the water line in cement to protect it, and we enclosed the entire system in an iron cage for protection, for status, and for ease of maintenance. We bought a food-grade stainless steel water tank and anchored it to the roof of the brick hut next to the temple to keep it away from vandals. We tapped the local electrical grid and paid the local electrician to give both grid power and solar power to the system and its batteries. We painted walls that had not been painted in decades. The villagers tell us we stimulated the first effort at recovery anywhere in the region. Once we had a site chosen, workers hired, water and power sources identified, and an iron box to keep everything safe, we brought the system up and began the installation. We noticed that the more the villagers saw our ideas taking shape through the work of people they knew and trusted, the more support we received. The installation was successful, and one of the first things we found was that even though the source water looked clear, it was truly filthy. Our filters had trouble keeping up, and we had to redesign our flow pattern several times to make sure the filter cleaning schedule would be reasonable. But once we established the right configuration and a good water flow, the water we started producing was clearly gorgeous, and the villagers started yelling for each other to come and get a drink. The German government had flown in a German engineering firm to Kathmandu, THW, and they were delivering large bladders of purified water downtown. Fortunately, they had a water lab with them. THW engineers agreed as a favor to travel with us up to our village and run tests on our raw source water and our purified Roddenberry system water. The results were all we could have hoped for. The incoming water from the village tap had thousands of colonies of fecal coliforms and enterococci in every drop, so it is profoundly contaminated with human waste and is unfit for human consumption. That same water, after our treatment, was perfect. The bacterial counts dropped to 0, and the water we are providing to the village now meets or exceeds every global standard. We came to know the villagers a little, and on our last day with them we were treated to a private lunch in a very damaged home. The food had taken them 4 hours in their broken homes to prepare, and they brought in our clean Roddenberry water to celebrate the start of reconstruction. There were many toasts, and we began to hear stories about the losses they had suffered. One of those working most closely with us had not mentioned until this lunch that he had lost his 2-year-old son in the earthquake, and that we were eating lunch in the remains of his home. The village was very proud of the effort they'd all put forth to make this system a reality in less than a week. During our final days, we identified a group of people who would ensure the ongoing safety of the system. They selected a manager to link to us in English, Prem Khatri. They chose a local plumber to have day-to-day responsibility for clean filters and charge batteries and other operational issues that ensure the delivery of clean water. And we also learned that the plumber had been by far the smartest kid in the village. He'd had some big dreams, but there was no hope for further education, so he became the very good village plumber. We trained people on the system, left spare parts, left tools for maintenance and repair, and painted the walls with the help of several local kids looking for any way to be a part of this. The village elders were very clear about what they wanted in English on the walls and what they wanted written in Nepali, so the villagers brought in the local artist. We also arranged for fair compensation as we left. We're paying Prem as the country manager and Ball, the local plumber who speaks no English, as our site manager, and both are delighted with the arrangement. We are receiving notes and photographs of the system every few days from Prem, and the system is working beautifully. They now call it, in Nepali, the water that heals the sick, and people are coming from other villages for a sample. We unwrapped the faucets in the late afternoon, and within moments there was a line. The villagers know all about bad water, and they'd all been trying to boil the water from their original village tap because they're very aware of how sick that water makes them. But since the earthquake, there's been no fuel, and so they're burning the wood from their ruined homes to boil the water. They are, of course, very poor, so that makes it even more difficult to rebuild. Even the local Buddhist monastery joined the crowd at the tap and agreed to be a part of the new oversight committee. That committee knows we intend to return 3 months after our departure to check on things, to assess our impact, and to determine next steps. The extent of the gratitude became most evident when, on our last day, an hour before our departure, we received a visit in our little village from the President and the First Lady of Nepal. They expressed their gratitude for what we'd done for the village, said we were welcome back to Nepal at any time, and wished us a safe journey home. But more importantly than the President, the villagers of Dharmastali thank you, the Roddenberry Foundation, for what you have supported. Instead of a modest intervention to keep a displaced camp population safe during recovery from a disaster, we've provided a remote and badly destroyed village of 3,500 people with clean drinking water for the first time in their history. It's a permanent solution, driven by local needs, local resources, and local decisions. We used a water purification system designed for disaster relief, but able to adapt to larger needs. We carry with us letters written by children in the community, thanking you, the Foundation, for coming to them when they were most in need. When we find a little time to be together, we'll present you with a set of their letters to you in Nepali and in English. We'll be happy to answer questions about any aspect of our deployment, but we should mention that we came in on time and slightly under budget. We look forward to discussing it further. Thank you again for the opportunity to help this village. With your support, we were able to deliver a great deal more than we'd expected. A lot of people are grateful, and the benefit will continue for years.